So at this point, you should have an STL file created from the part that you plan to 3D print. So in a previous video, I created an STL of part 2 red. So I'm going to show you how to take that STL file and put it into a slicer and then export that as G-code that you can then place in a 3D printer. So to get started, I am going to open up a new tab and I'm going to do a Google search for Kiri Moto, spelled just like that, and hit enter. And it should be your first hit, but this is where you want to go, Kiri Moto Grid Space. And this is a cloud-based slicer program that works pretty well. So once you come in here, the first thing that you're going to want to do is you can get rid of this example piece, or you can leave it there if that's what you want to print to start with, but typically you don't want that piece. So I'm going to click it and then hit the delete key. So I just clicked on it to highlight it, then I hit the delete key on my keyboard, and I'm going to come up here to setup, and I didn't even click on it, I just hovered over it, and you can see these options popped up. I'm going to click on machine, and I already have the machine that I'm creating for selected, but for the most part we're going to be using FDM printers, so make sure you stick around in here. We do have one SLA printer, a Form 3. I have not tried out if this works for that specific printer yet, so we're going to stick with FDM for now, and the vast majority of our printers are Creality Ender 3s. And you should not have to do anything in here except for select Creality Ender 3. Once you do that, you can just click out of that window, and then you can see right here below it there is a Files tab. If you hover over that, you can come over to Import, and then you should get a window that pops up, and you can navigate through your desktop or wherever you have your files saved to find the STL file that you created. So right here is mine, part 2 red, so I'm going to click on that, and you can see that that brings it in. And if you converted the file right, it should already be the correct size, so you should not have to do any resizing. If you need to, you can in here, but I would recommend that you have the size worked out before you convert it to an STL, so I'm not going to mess with that right at the moment. Right here you can change your view if you need to. You can also click and hold with the left mouse key to kind of change your view a little bit. You can also use the wheel of your mouse to zoom out or zoom in. And let's see here. Over here is export. This is what we're going to click when we're all finished and ready to send this to the 3D printer. But before we do that, we want to come over here, and you can see that there's a bunch of different things that we can click on over here. Slicing, we shouldn't need to change any of that just yet, but you can see you have some different settings that you can mess with in there. The infill, again, you may find that you want to change the type of infill, like you can choose different shapes. I'm going to stick with hex for this one, and this is your percentage of infill right here, which depending on what you're doing you may want to also change. I'm going to leave these settings for now at their default. So I'm going to come actually down here to output first, and this is going to be the first place that you want to make sure that you have some settings right. So in output you want to make sure that your nozzle temp is set for the material that you're using. Now we're going to be printing this piece in PLA. So I want my nozzle temperature for PLA plastic to be 200 degrees. My bed temperature I want to make sure is at 60 degrees. I already had those set in here, but you likely need to change them from their defaults. After you do that, come up here to first layer, and you want to make sure that your first layer temperature for your nozzle temp is 215. That seems to be what works the best for PLA. So nozzle temperature for the first layer should be 215 degrees. Bed temperature we can leave set at 0. That doesn't mean that it's at 0 degrees. Whenever 0 is used for either of these settings, It just means that it's going to default to what you have set in output. So once you have that stuff set, you can come in here to support and click enable if you need to. I don't need to for this piece, so I'm not going to. You can also add a raft if you need to. A raft would be if you, or you would need a raft if you're going to have a piece that doesn't have a particularly large amount of contact with the build plate. This piece does have a lot of contact, so I'm not going to turn a raft on, but I could. We could also do some rotating of the piece if we needed to with this button down here, but again, this is already set up how I need it to be set up, so I am not going to mess with that. So now I'm all finished with this. I'm going to come and click export. And while you're waiting for that to load, just sit tight, and then once it's all finished slicing it, you can then hit this download button. Once it is downloaded, it should show up down here, and just like we did when we exported the file from Onshape, you want to pull that out of that folder, and I'm going to rename it before I even do anything else. So I'm going to right click on it and then choose rename, and I'm going to call it Part 2 Red. And once I do that, now I can take this and drag it and drop it into a folder that is for 3D printed parts, or I can put it in onto a drive. Like if you have your mini SD card for the Ender 3 already loaded into your computer, you can drag it and drop it directly onto that card, but you can also drag it and drop it into a folder that you make, which if you don't already have a folder, I would recommend you do so. And then you have your 3D print files. If you are making a folder for this type of file, I would either call it G-code, or I would call it like 3D print files, because these are the files that you can place directly on the SD card to then make 3D prints. If you are planning to make files for different 3D printers, have a different folder for each of the printers that you're going to make files for, because you can't take an Ender 3 file and print in the Ender 5 with it. Same thing with Prusa. Like you can't make an Ender 3 file and then try and use it in Prusa. So every printer needs its own specific files. So make sure that if you are using more than one type of printer, you have all of your files separated appropriately.